in this training, let's ask ourselves two questions. First, what does it mean for a student to have an accommodation? And what does it mean for a student to have a modification? As general education teachers, we often bring in these documents for your review. You're asked to make sure that you accommodate, that you follow the paperwork exactly, adjust instruction accordingly. But what exactly does that mean in the general education setting? The thing that I would caution, there is a big difference between an accommodation and a modification, and oftentimes teachers find themselves in the position where they're inadvertently modifying when they really were just trying to accommodate. So I leave you with this. An accommodation is simply leveling the playing field, simply providing that student the boost, if you will, to be able to access their instruction. You are not changing the curriculum in any way. You are simply adding something or taking something away that will enable them to be able to have meaningful participation in the curriculum. For example, you would give a student, let's talk about reduced assignments for just a moment because that's a big one that we often give to kids. A reduced assignment is an accommodation, is an accommodation as long as you are not eliminating any of the components of the TEKS or of the curriculum. So for example, if a student has an accommodation of reduced assignments by 50%, as long as you're not simply cutting that paper in half and saying there's 10 questions, here's 5, you are not modifying. However, if you take this a step further and you cut that paper in half, knowing that those are mixed problems, knowing that standard 2.1 is problems number 1 through 5, and standard 2.2 is 6 through 10. At that point, you've modified because you've completely eliminated standard 2.2. However, if you have a mix of those problems and you are meaningfully selecting which ones that student does not have to do, at that point, you're simply having them show their mastery without eliminating components of the curriculum. So, accommodations do not fundamentally alter or lower expectations or standards in an instructional level, content, or performance area. They provide equal access to learning and equal opportunity to demonstrate what is learned. And grading and credit is the same as typical students. Modification, on the other hand, as I mentioned, do change the expectations. They provide student meaningful and productive learning experiences based on individual needs and abilities. Grading and credit are different. So in other words, the level of expectation is different than their general education. Accommodations help students learn the same material and meet the expectations as their peers. So some examples of accommodations might be reading question and answer choices, expanding the print, extra time to complete a task, preferential seating, and use of a calculator to be able to complete their assignment. The modification, on the other hand, is going to change that curriculum. Perhaps the students are working on prerequisite skills. Perhaps we're needing to scaffold those skills down in order to get that student back up to level. So, for example, they could be assigned a lower level text as opposed to the text assigned to their classmates. The student could be assigned the lower level math problems that are foundational skill, or a spelling list on the student's current ability level, as opposed to their grade level spelling level. At this point, we'd play a game of Jeopardy. Show that real quick. So with this Jeopardy game, teams are assigned, or the participants are assigned to 2 teams, and just like Jeopardy, they get to choose their topic and point value. So true, false, accommodations are specific, individualized instruction, environmental, and assessment strategies necessary for a student to meet curriculum expectations. This would be true. So depending on the amount of time available, depending on how long the class would be, we might go through this entire game. When I presented this staff development last week, we had a much smaller group, so we didn't go through the entire game. We actually just kind of did a few of the different accommodation modifications and the wild card and general knowledge, but we really focused on these classroom scenarios in an effort to allow the teachers in our training to really kind of practice with the difference between the accommodation and modification, understanding that at times it's very easy to move from an accommodation to a modification, sometimes without even knowing that you're doing it. And so we really wanted to focus on this so that the teachers could really get some practice with it and really kind of see for themselves what the difference between them were. Oops. Fast forward through this. All right. At this point, we talked about differentiation. So everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. This famous quote credited to Albert Einstein. The focus here was that if each person each person has their own gifts, and it's our jobs as educators to help our students find those gifts, and we can do that through differentiation. So the end product may not be the same for every student, and this can be done with either modifying or accommodating. So for example, if you have a student that is a fantastic writer, you might allow them to write a storybook to demonstrate their knowledge or their understanding of a topic. You may have another student who can't write to save their lives and really can, if you saw their writing, you might think, oh, they've got nothing. They don't know anything that I just taught. I'm a complete failure as an educator. And when in actuality, had we given them a different mode of demonstrating their knowledge, we would see maybe that they knew even more than the kid that's at the top of the class. And so we just go into why differentiation is important. We had this little video that talks about and gives examples of different types of differentiation, have the students or the participants watch. And then we started talking about fair versus equal. And so, again, really focusing on the need for differentiation. So here we see equality versus equity. Equality is sameness, so we can give everybody the exact same thing, but they're not going to be able to access the curriculum as well. Whereas over here, if you give them what they need to be able to access the curriculum, they'll be able to find their own success. And then we had another video about equity. And then we actually had the student or the participants participate in this next video, the equity and equality race. Anyway, this video just goes on to show how important it is to understand where our students are coming from, how important it is to understand how their basket is filled, understanding that the child who didn't eat breakfast that morning may not be able to focus on what you have for them to focus that day. That's not important to them at that moment. And until we can meet them where they are, um, we're not going to be able to really serve them. And so letting our teachers understand that all of our kids are just a reminder that our kids are coming from different places and we need to meet them where they are and understand that at times accommodations and modifications are going to be important for them. So then we went into how do you decide which accommodations are needed, if or if any are needed at all. One of the things to understand about accommodations and modifications is, yes, while the ARD document says, or the 504 service plan says, these are the accommodations they need, teachers need to understand that we need to document the need for those accommodations so that when there is a 504 meeting or an ARD meeting, um, those committees can make meaningful decisions about what accommodations are necessary. And so we look at the different types of data available. So of course we have our TEKS verification documents, vertical alignment documents. The website Lead Forward is amazing for this. Assessment data, so data from AWARE, daily work samples, student journal, writing samples, oral interviews, informal assessments, weekly assessments. Really want teachers to understand that what's going on in the classroom is good information, especially when aligned with the curriculum, because it allows teachers and the committees to understand what it is that child needs to be successful. We also have the full and individual evaluation, teacher input forms. The FIE is super important when it comes to accommodating and modifying. Your evaluation staff spends a ton of time evaluating to really determine what is going on with that child and what that child needs to be successful, to therein make recommendations for further instruction. And so it's important that that not just be a document that's put in the file until the next one's written 3 years later, um, and really understand how to read that document. So we talk about how to read an FIE. Participants were given a redacted copy of a real FIE that was written in March. And we went through and had an activity where they were able to go through and pull out pieces of the FIE. So they were asked to find the student's sociological status. They were asked to find something interesting about the student. They were asked to find the student's number of referrals. They were asked to find the sources of data and so on, so that it would get them kind of hands-on in the FIE, and understand that even them as general education teachers, this is an important document to them, and that they're more than welcome to ask to review that evaluation and to ask their campus evaluator to help them interpret that or read through that and really know what it is that they're seeing there. So then we talk about collaboration between the general education teacher and the special education teacher and how to implement the the IEP, excuse me. So we really wanted to make sure that we had lots of videos built in, so that teachers could see for themselves what this looks like and how this process could work together. And also to dispel some of the myths or stereotypes of general ed and special education teachers working together. We then held a group discussion on how teachers are accommodating and modifying within their own classrooms. They had some great examples, specifically allowing a student to pick their seating, or allowing a student to demonstrate their knowledge. I had a couple of history teachers, and so in this class we had a kindergarten teacher, two history teachers, and a computer teacher. And so the kindergarten teacher, really talked more about the flexible seating and maybe making accommodations for riding and that kind of thing. Our history teachers talked about demonstrating knowledge through projects or using the computer. And so they seem to have some good ideas, and seem to leave with more ideas of how they might be able to accommodate. We then went on to talk about the PLAF to IEP to accommodations process. We really wanted teachers to be able to be an active participant in this process. Oftentimes in our district, we have special education teachers just kind of pull all the data together, and they write the present levels of performance, then they write the IEP and make recommendations for the accommodations. And we really want our general education teachers to understand this process and to really kind of even appreciate all the work that their special education counterpart is putting into things. But again, we want teachers to know that they have a meaningful part in this process. So then we go into a PLAF writing activity. Teachers are given lots of different data points, and they are then asked to come up with a suggested PLAF to then be able to move into the IEP, so they can see how those two are related, and then can write a meaningful goal that would apply to their content area. Then talk about strategies for the classroom. So graphic organizers for writing, a calculator for math, whether it's to actually solve the problem or to check their work, a place value chart, fraction graphics, so they know the difference between the different the fraction pieces and time, proportional values and that kind of thing. Mnemonic devices, extra time, preferential seating, headphones to block out noise during working periods. At this point, we're given a 2-page example of different types of accommodations. We also provided some websites that would be a great resource for teachers. So while all teachers go into, or should go into, education in order to help our students, every once in a while we have to remind teachers of the why behind the need for accommodations and following the IEP. And so we actually at this point discussed a law case that's a few years old, but it is Doe versus Withers. And this is a legal case that is remarkable in that it was one of the first cases that awarded monetary value or monetary damages in a special education case. Typically, when a special education complaint goes to hearing, it might be rewarded with compensatory education or that kind of thing. In this case, Doe versus Withers, Mr. Withers was a teacher who refused, even after being told multiple times to implement accommodations and modifications. He refused, flat out refused. And so the parents, the student failed, had several years of kind of fighting things. Student got moved to a different teacher, or excuse me, Mr. Withers went on a leave of absence. And when he went on a leave of absence, they had a substitute teacher who came in who gave this set accommodations, and suddenly this student was passing. And so that just proved even more so that these were needed accommodations. And so kind of gave the parents a little bit more leverage as to, getting that enforced. And so this did end up going to court and was actually a civil case. And the parents were awarded, I believe it was $60,000, $30,000 being paid by Mr. Withers himself. They also sued the superintendent, the principal, and the school board in general. And so $30,000 was paid out by Mr. Withers, and then $10,000 each by the remaining defendants. And so this was just a quick reminder of the ramifications or potential ramifications that may happen from not following through with expectations. We actually ran out of time at this point. This is where we learned, as I mentioned in my reflection, this is where we learned that our training would have been better suited for maybe 4 to 6 hours because we had lots of content. One of the things that I learned from this is that it's better to have too much content than not enough. And so when teaching this in the future, we plan to actually present this as a 6-hour training. But this is just a quick video on different strategies. One of the things we wanted to stress with differentiation is the fact that it actually can allow a teacher to dive even further into content and be able to take the onus off of the teacher and allow the students to really own their learning. And so one of the misconceptions about differentiation is I have 30 students or I have 100 students. I can't take time to do this, when in actuality, some of the things that we're asking teachers to do are just good teaching practices, and all of their students might benefit in some capacity. So kind of taking the fear, if you will, away from differentiation. So then we go into question and answer time. And then just kind of a reminder to teachers to be the change and be willing to do what's best for our students. So this was a pleasure to teach, and my counterpart and I actually are currently searching different ways that we might be able to teach this, or different places we might be able to teach again. It was definitely a joy, and one of the things that I think as an administrator or campus support that would actually be pretty fun and something that I would look forward to doing. So this was a great opportunity. And I believe our participants enjoyed it as well. Particularly some of the games that we played, and then of course some of the videos, and it was just kind of eye-opening for them, they said. So anyway,